Hey there friends, Andrea Walford here from Make Beautiful Cards. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create this You've Been on My Mind card featuring Stampin' Up's Jar of Flowers stamp set. So the main image for my card comes from two different stamp sets. The floral part that you see here is from Stampin' Up's Jar of Flowers stamp set. And then that terracotta pot comes from the Simply Succulents stamp set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp each of these images onto a piece of white cardstock. So I'm going to be using my Memento Tuxedo Black ink. So I'm going to ink up, first of all, my floral stamp. And you can see I have my stamp face upward, so that makes it easy for me to see that my stamp has been well inked. And then I'm going to stamp it onto my cardstock piece. And then next I'm going to take my pot image or my planter and I'm going to stamp this as well. And I'll probably stamp it above my floral image. So I do have a die that coordinates with the planter, so I'll be able to die cut that, but then for the floral image, I'm going to have to fussy cut that image. So let's go ahead now. We're going to color our images using our Stampin' Blends markers. So the first thing I'm going to color is the terracotta pot. And for that, I'm going to be using my light and dark Cajun Craze and my light Calypso Coral. So I'm going to start by covering the entire surface of my terracotta pot with my light Calypso Coral. Now I'm going to take my dark Cajun Craze and first of all, just to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to outline the inner area of my pot with my dark Cajun Craze. Now, using my tip and a flicking motion, I'm going to start bringing this color outwards. So I'm starting from the outer edges and brushing the color inwards. Now I'm going to take my light Cajun Craze. Actually, let me just grab I'm going to grab an acrylic block, and I'm going to use this as a bit of a palette. So I'm going to place my dark Cajun Craze on here, then I'm going to place my light Cajun Craze on here, and I'm going to put quite a bit of dark Cajun Craze, like so. So now I'm going to take my light Cajun Craze, I'm going to pick up some of my dark Cajun Craze, and I'm just going to brush that over the edge of my dark Cajun Craze. So what I'm going to do though is as I brush over with this color, I am starting pretty much from the edge of my pot. Now I'm going to come in with my light Calypso Coral, and I'm just going to add some more of my light Cajun Craze. And now I'm going to take my light Calypso Coral and I'm going to pick up that light Cajun Craze, and I'm going to brush this over the edge of that intermediate color there. And as you can see, I'm leaving an area here that has just the light color because I want it to have a highlight there. So I'm just going to come back. I need to blend this out just a little bit more using my light Cajun Craze. So I'm adding multiple layers. And now I'm just going to add a single layer of my light Calypso coral across the entire surface of my pot. So just to smooth it out and act as a bit of a finisher. So there you can see how my terracotta pot looks. So I'm just going to close up my markers here, and then I'm going to grab the colors for the flowers, and then we're going to color the flowers. So the first thing we're going to color is our sunflowers. So I'm going to take the brush tip of my light Daffodil Delight, and I'm just going to color in a single layer on all the petals of my sunflowers in my image. So as you can see, if you look at this image of this cluster of flowers, there's 3 sunflowers. So I want to go ahead and I want to color the petals of all of them in my light Daffodil Delight. So there you can see what that looks like. Now I colored a little bit out of the lines with one of my petals. So I'm just going to take my color lifter and I'm going to push that color back towards the edge of the image. So now the next color I'm going to add is my dark Mango Melody. So I'm going to add a little bit of that color on the inner area of each of my petals. And I'm just using a flicking stroke and just bringing that color up the center, but not all the way to the edge of the petal. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my dark Mango Melody and I'm going to scribble it onto my acrylic block, and then I'm going to take my light Daffodil Delight, I'm going to pick that color up, and I'm just going to blend it a little bit over the edge of where the Mango Melody is. So what I'm doing is I'm creating kind of an intermediate color, and I'm blending out that Mango Melody. But I don't want to go all the way to the tip because I don't want to lose that Daffodil Delight. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this for all the petals. So I finished my sunflowers. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to color the centers. I'm going to color the entire center area with my light Cinnamon Cider. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that with a single layer of Cinnamon Cider for all 3. And then once I've done that, I'm going to come back with my dark Cinnamon Cider, and just on the bottom, I'm going to brush upwards and cover maybe 1/4 to 1/3 of that area. But I'm going to layer it because you can see the single layer, it didn't darken it enough. So I'm going to come in with a second layer, and then a 3rd layer, and then probably even a 4th layer, just so that I can create more contrast, like so. So there you can see I've added some shading. And because of the texture on the center of the sunflower, you don't really have to do much in the way of blending. Just where the edges are, you can just kind of blend, brush just with a little flicking motion with the light Cinnamon Cider, and then that is good enough. So now I'm going to color the purple flower. So I'm going to start with my light Purple Posy with my brush tip, and I'm going to color the center, and then I'm also going to color each of the leaves, like so. Now I'm going to come in with my light Blackberry Bliss, and I want to add some shading to the center of my flower. And I'm also going to grab, I think, my dark Blackberry Bliss because I want even more contrast. So I'm going to brush out where I added the dark Blackberry Bliss. And then now I'm going to grab, let's see, take my light Purple Posy again, and just blend that edge out. So let's see what colors I have here. So I'm not going to use my Blackberry Bliss anymore. I use that, the light and dark, for the center of the flower. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab, this one is my dark Highland Heather. It's a little bit darker than the purple, than the dark purple posy. So I'm just going to dot a little bit of the color towards the center area of the petals here, like so. And then I'm just going to take the tip of my purple posy and I'm just going to brush it over the very edge of that Highland Heather color just to soften it and blend it out a little bit. So there you can see what that looks like. Now for my flowers, you can see I have a few little small flowers and buds. I'm going to start with my light Flirty Flamingo and I'm going to color the entire petal with my light Flirty Flamingo. And I'm going to color these buds as well with the light Flirty Flamingo, like so. Now I'm going to take some of my light magenta and I just want to flick a little bit of color in the center, like so, and then a little bit, just a little dot almost towards the bottom of each of these buds. Then I'm going to put some of this color on my acrylic block and I'm going to pick it up with my light Flirty Flamingo, and then I just want to blend the very edges of my magenta using this intermediate color that I'm creating. And then here I'm not going to bother picking up the magenta, I'm just using my light Flirty Flamingo to blend out those colors. So the last thing we're going to do now is we're going to take our light Granny Apple Green and we're going to color our leaves. And then the bottom of that bud there. Here for this kind of fern-like image, I'm not going to try to stay within the leaves. I'm going to kind of color in between them as well, because near the top they're so tiny that you don't actually have an open space to color. So here you can see what this looks like. So now for the pot, I have here, these are the potted succulents dies, and they come with the Simply Succulent stamp set that you see here. I'm going to take the die for the pot and I'm going to place it around the pot like so, and I'm going to go ahead and die cut it. So I've gone ahead and die cut my pot. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fussy cut my floral image. Now to make it easier, I'm just going to cut around this. And then I'm going to take my paper snips and I'm going to leave about the same amount of border as I have here on my die cut pot. So probably about a 1/16 of an inch border. And you want to use the inside of your blade. You can notice I'm holding my scissors on a slight angle, so I'm angling it to the right, and I'm cutting using the inside of my blade. My cutting hand is not moving a lot other than to cut, and it's my left hand that I'm using to rotate and angle my paper. Now, I do have a video on YouTube called How to Fussy Cut Like a Pro, and it shares all sorts of tips for getting great results when you're fussy cutting. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to finish fussy cutting this image, and then I will be back. So I finished fussy cutting my floral image, as you see here. So I'm going to set my floral image and my planter aside, and now I'm going to die cut the cover plate. This comes from the Potted Succulents dies. So here you can see what it looks like. So I have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 piece of white cardstock, and I'm going to take some of my double-sided adhesive. These are adhesive sheets, and I'm peeling off the backing. The backing comes in segments. So I'm just peeling off a section, or peeling back a section of the backing, and then I can go ahead and I can align this with the top edge of my cardstock piece. So I cut my adhesive sheet so that it's the same width as my cardstock sheet. So you can see I've stuck down one segment, and then as I remove the segments of backing, I'm attaching the adhesive to my cardstock. But my adhesive sheet is a little bit longer than my cardstock piece, so you can see I've folded the backing over, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut, and then I'm going to save that little piece that you see there. So now I'm going to take this cover plate die, and I'm going to place it face down on my cardstock sheet. So I'm making sure the adhesive is at the back, and then I'm going to hold this in place using a little bit of my Scotch removable tape, just so it doesn't slide as I'm die cutting. So once I've die cut this, I will be back. So I'm back from my die cutting machine, and you can see we have all these little pieces that we need to pop out from our die cut piece. So to help make it easier to pop it out, I'm going to be using the brush tip from my Take Your Pick tool. Now this is the Take Your Pick tool, and I can unscrew the tip that you see here and screw on this brush tip, except that you don't really need to. I just hold on to it and use it like this. Now when you buy the brush tip, it comes with 2 of these foam pads. So you place your die cut onto the foam pads, and then you simply brush your die tip over top. Now I have here just a little remnant of the tape that I have to remove. So now I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to use the brush tip to brush out all these little inner portions of my die. And then when I peel back the die, you can see I've gotten most of them. So let's just go ahead and I'm going to finish with this and see if I can remove these few pieces. So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to finish cleaning this up, and I will be back. So I finished cleaning out my die. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel back part of the backing here, just to get it started. And then I'm going to take a second piece of cardstock. I'm going to align it with the edges here. And I'm going to stick it down. So now that I've stuck part of it down, you can see here I can start removing my backing. And then I can stick it all the way down like so. So now I'm going to take one of my dies from my stitched rectangle dies. So it's the 4th from the largest die, and I'm going to place it onto this piece of cardstock. Now unfortunately my die is a little bit too big for me to die cut this across. I have to do it like this, but that's okay. So I'm going to place my die on here, and then I'm going to take just a little bit of tape. I don't want a lot, so just a tiny little bit of tape, and I'm going to try not to get my tape on this piece here, just on the edge, just enough to hold my die in place as I die cut this. So I'm back from my die cutting machine, and here you can see what my panel looks like. So I'm going to set that aside, and now the last piece we're going to prepare is our greeting. So I'm using the You've Been on My Mind greeting from the Simply Succulents stamp set. So I have it attached to my grid paper. I'm going to take my embossing powder tool, and I want to pat it all over my strip and then just brush off that excess powder. Now I'm going to ink my stamp in my white craft ink. And then I'm going to center it on this little scrap strip. So this strip is 1/2 inch by about 2.5 inches. It was just a scrap that I had left over from when I'd been cutting my paper. So I'm going to center this, or do my best to center it on this strip. Then I'm going to place this over top of a coffee filter. I've poured on my white embossing powder and flicked off the excess. So now I'm just going to funnel this back into my container, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to heat emboss my greeting using my heat tool. Now, just so I don't burn my fingers, I'm going to hold this with my tweezers. So here you can see what my embossed piece looks like. Now, I wasn't quite able to center it on this piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim it. So first of all, I'm going to slide it onto my paper trimmer. And this is a guillotine style trimmer, and I'm using the very edge of the plastic guide to help me align how much I want to trim around it. So as long as I can't see any of my letters beyond the edge, I'll end up with about 1/8 of an inch border. Now, because my piece is so tiny, when you're cutting, you do want to make sure that you hold your piece, you hold the guard, this plastic guard, down firmly right where the paper piece is. So there you can see how my greeting piece looks, and I might just need to trim the bottom off a little bit. Okay, so now let's go ahead and start assembling our card. So this panel here, the one where I had die cut the cover plate, then stuck it onto another panel, and then die cut a stitched rectangle. This stitched rectangle is 2 5/8 of an inch by about 4 inches. So I've cut a size of gold foil cardstock that's that exact size. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to offset this gold piece just a little bit. So I'm going to offset it towards the right. I just want to clean my gold foil piece here because I had something stuck to it. So I'm going to offset it. So to offset it, basically what I'm doing is I'm taking my white cardstock piece and I'm angling it slightly towards the left. So I guess technically it's offset. Well, I don't know. Anyways, I angled my top piece towards the left. So now I'm placing some of my double-sided adhesive in between the two panels. So the adhesive is going directly over top of the gold foil, and I'm going to stick those down. Now here I have a white cardstock panel. It's 4 inches by 5.5 inches. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to emboss this with my subtle 3D embossing folder. And I want the embossed lines of this to be running horizontally. So you can see I'm holding my embossing folder with the fold to the left. And I'm going to put my piece in there. I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine. So I'm back from my die cutting machine. You can see I have my embossed panel. And now what I want to do is I want to trim it down so that it is 5 1/4 inches. I generally like to have my pieces a little bit longer than I think they're going to need to be, because sometimes the embossing can actually cause the cardstock to shrink a little bit. So now that I have this piece, I'm going to stick it onto the front of my note card. And my note card is a standard 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece. Sorry, 4 1/4, yeah, 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card, created out of a thick white cardstock. And I'm going to center and stick this embossed panel on top of it using Stampin' Dimensionals. Now, I'm being quite liberal with my Stampin' Dimensionals because I want there to be good support behind this panel. Oftentimes, when I want to pop up panels like this, I will use the edges of my dimensionals, but as you can see here, I've already used the edges. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove the back from some of my dimensionals, so the ones kind of in the top half. And then I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to center it onto my card. So there you can see I've attached part of it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the backing from my remaining Stampin' Dimensionals, and then I'm going to stick it all the way down. I find it easier to do it like this because your panel is less likely to shift when you do it like this. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stick this panel down, and I'm going to stick it down so that the bottom edge of the white panel is about 1/2 inch up from the bottom edge of the card, and then the right side is about 1/4 inch up from the edge of the card. So to stick it down, I'm going to use my double-sided adhesive. Next, I'm going to take my terracotta pot and I'm going to use my liquid glue. I'm going to place some liquid glue in the center back of my pot, and I'm going to stick the pot down so it looks like it's sitting on the stitched panel. And you can see I have it offset a little bit towards the right. Now I'm going to take my floral panel, oops, or I guess my grouping of flowers here, and then using some Stampin' Dimensionals, I'm going to stick this over top of my pot. And then for my greeting, I'm going to take some mini Stampin' Dimensionals. So I've removed the backing from my Stampin' Dimensionals, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this down so that it is overhanging the left-hand edge of my die cut panel, like so. Maybe not quite that much. We'll overhang it a little bit less. And it's up probably, the bottom edge is probably about 3/8 to 1/2 inch up from the bottom edge of that die cut panel. So the last thing that we need to do for our card now is embellish it with some rhinestones. I'm going to take a medium rhinestone, I'm going to put it on my terracotta pot, and then I'm going to take another medium rhinestone and I'll put one here to the left of the purple flowers, and then I think I'll put one maybe over here, a small one, and then a final one up here. So there you have it, friends. You can see what our card looks like, and it's now finished.